The American Civil War, a cataclysmic rupture that claimed over 600,000 lives, was not a sudden diplomatic breakdown. Rather, it was the explosive culmination of centuries of systemic and economic contradictions baked into the very foundation of the nation. When delegates gathered in Philadelphia in 1787, the question of slavery threatened to unravel the republic before it even started. South Carolinians made it clear that a constitution threatening the slave trade was a deal-breaker. The core of the debate centered on representation in Congress. Southern states fiercely argued that enslaved people, despite being legally considered property without any civil rights or privileges, should be counted toward a state's population to determine its number of delegates in the House of Representatives. The resulting impasse led to the infamous 3/5 compromise. This agreement stipulated that 3/5 of a state's enslaved population would be counted for the purpose of apportioning representation in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College. The result? It artificially inflated the political power of white Southern slaveholders, embedding a volatile sectional imbalance into the very architecture of the federal government. That early logic, union first, slavery accommodated, did not merely postpone conflict. It created a durable political habit. Slavery would be negotiated, not adjudicated. Following the drafting of the Constitution, some founders naively hoped slavery would gradually fade as crops like tobacco became less profitable. The 19th century delivered the exact opposite. The invention of the cotton gin turbocharged production by easily removing its stubborn seeds, making enslaved labor explosively valuable across the interior South. This technological shift transformed slavery from a problem into the foundational pillar of Southern society. As new cotton lands opened, the domestic slave trade expanded from the Upper South to the Deep South. Slave states grew from 6 in 1790 to 15 by 1860. Between 1790 and 1810 alone, the enslaved population increased by an astonishing 70%, reaching 1.2 million. This development turned the American South into a global agricultural powerhouse. Cotton was king. The plantation system resulted in stark regional differences. Southern wealth was entirely tied up in slavery, leading to a poorly diversified economy. Rich planters lacked incentives to invest in new ventures, and enslaved labor left fewer opportunities for white workers, leading to a weak labor market. Meanwhile, the North started to industrialize. By 1860, the economic value of enslaved people exceeded the invested value of all the nation's railroads, factories, and banks combined. Once cotton made Western land more politically important, every new territory became a question of power. Would it enter the Union as a free or slave state? As the Louisiana Purchase opened up vast new lands, the admission of new states became less like routine governance and more like defusing a bomb. The first explosion came with Missouri. The Louisiana Purchase had doubled the size of the United States in 1803, and as vast swaths of land were colonized, the Missouri Territory, swelled by settlers eager to exploit the land, applied for statehood in 1819. The admission of the new state ignited a political firestorm, as it would tip the balance between slave and free states in the Senate. The congressional debates that followed were marked by vicious sectional animosity and explicit threats of disunion. The solution? Missouri was admitted as a slave state, and Maine, which had long sought independence from Massachusetts, was admitted as a free state to maintain the balance. Furthermore, the compromise incorporated the prohibition of slavery above latitude 36 degrees 30 minutes in the remaining Louisiana Territory. At the time, the Missouri Compromise was praised as a Union-saving measure. While it averted immediate disaster, it only maintained an uneasy peace for the next 34 years. Over time, sectional geography hardened further as enslaved people resisted and slaveholders responded with fear and force. The most dramatic sign of that resistance was Nat Turner's rebellion in Virginia in 1831, known as the deadliest slave revolt in U.S. history. Over the course of 3 days, Turner and his allies killed 60 white people. Local militia, armed citizens, and eventually state and federal forces mobilized quickly and retaliated with horrific massacres that killed 100 black people, many with no connection to the revolt. This event fundamentally changed the rhetorical strategy of Southern intellectuals and politicians. They ceased apologizing for slavery as a necessary evil and began aggressively defending it as a positive good sanctioned by history and God. In the North, The revolt exposed the brutality of slavery and made it harder for moderates to claim it was a benign or paternalistic institution. If slavery were humane, why would people risk everything to violently escape it? Northerners realized that the South system was both dangerous and incompatible with free society values. In fact, a new generation of Northern abolitionists, driven by fierce moral conviction, forced slavery into the center of national politics. They overwhelmed Congress with petitions for abolition, which were championed by former President John Quincy Adams, serving his twilight years as a representative of Massachusetts. Southern lawmakers reacted by imposing a sweeping gag rule in 1836, automatically silencing all anti-slavery petitions. After an 8-year-long battle against the rule, Adams finally managed to overturn it. However, his relentless crusade gradually awakened Northern lawmakers to the realization that the slave power was willing to suppress the civil liberties of white Northerners to protect its worldview, fostering virulent sectionalism. The fragile geopolitical balance was shattered entirely by the ideology of manifest destiny and the aftermath of the Mexican-American War. The American victory in 1848 resulted in the acquisition of 525,000 square miles of new territory. The immediate burning question arose: would this vast new empire be open to the expansion of slavery? The crisis reached a fever pitch in 1849 when California, its population swelled by the gold rush, applied for statehood directly as a free state. Admitting California would forever destroy the equal balance of slave and free states in the Senate. With the nation teetering on the brink of disunion, politicians engineered the complex compromise of 1850. It admitted California as a free state, allowed the territories of New Mexico and Utah to decide the slavery question via popular sovereignty, and abolished the public slave trade in Washington, D.C. To appease a furious South, it also included a draconian new Fugitive Slave Act. This heavily strengthened law stripped accused runaways of the right to a jury trial and required ordinary citizens in all states to actively assist in the capture of suspected fugitives. Anyone aiding an escaped enslaved person faced harsh federal prosecution, fines up to $1,000, a massive sum at the time, and imprisonment. The Compromise of 1850 was intended by politicians to be a final, lasting settlement, but it was merely a stopgap that transformed Northern streets into hunting grounds and ignited a decade of unprecedented radicalization. Abolitionists formed vigilance committees to protect fugitives, providing legal aid, medical care, and safe transport toward Canada, which was now the only true haven for the enslaved. The so-called Underground Railroad, a clandestine, decentralized network of routes and safe houses to help individuals escape from the South, became a banner of political resistance, showing that wherever slavery existed, there were efforts to escape. Every successful escape undermined the premise that people could be held as property. While some fought in the streets, others fought with the pen. Harriet Beecher Stowe authored Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, vividly depicting the brutal realities of slavery. The book became a global literary phenomenon, standing as the second best-selling book of the 19th century after the Bible. In the South, it was banned and denounced as slanderous propaganda, but the novel's influence was so profound that it transformed thousands of formerly apathetic citizens into fervent opponents of slavery. Legend claims Abraham Lincoln greeted Stowe at the White House in 1862 by saying, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." In 1854, a domestic legislative maneuver shattered the fragile peace. Seeking to organize Western territories for a transcontinental railroad, Senator Stephen A. Douglas introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act. To secure Southern votes, the bill explicitly repealed the sacred 36 degrees 30 minutes line of the Missouri Compromise, allowing local settlers to vote on whether to permit slavery. The passage had explosive consequences. It destroyed the Whig Party and gave birth to the Republican Party, a Northern coalition dedicated to halting the expansion of the institution. More tangibly, it turned the territory into a literal bloody battleground that became known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery border ruffians from neighboring Missouri flooded across the border to illegally stack the territorial elections, fraudulently setting up a temporary pro-slavery government. In response, heavily armed anti-slavery Free Staters established a rival government. The result? Widespread voter intimidation, the sacking of towns, and brutal murders, a prelude to the Civil War. With the legislative branch paralyzed, the Supreme Court attempted to settle the controversy permanently in 1857 with the Dred Scott case. The court delivered a catastrophic 7-2 ruling, which is widely considered one of the worst decisions ever rendered. It decreed that people of African descent were never intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution and possessed no legal standing to sue in federal court. Furthermore, it ruled that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 had been unconstitutional all along, effectively legalizing slavery in all Western territories. This signaled to the North that the highest court in the land was wholly captured by the slave power. Amid this backlash, one of the most consequential election cycles in American history began to unfold. A relatively unknown Republican lawyer named Abraham Lincoln entered the senatorial race in Illinois in 1858 against Stephen A. Douglas. Despite losing the race, Lincoln cornered Douglas into softening his position on slavery, getting him to declare that territories could still keep slavery out by refusing to pass local laws protecting it, in defiance of the Dred Scott decision, which considered slaves as property that neither Congress nor democracy could take away. Even though this argument saved Douglas politically in Illinois, it outraged Southern Democrats, setting the stage to tear the party apart. As politicians debated, radical abolitionist John Brown concluded that the time for peaceful rhetoric had passed. In October 1859, Brown launched a nighttime raid on the Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, intending to arm the local enslaved population and ignite a rolling rebellion. The raid failed, and Brown was captured and hanged. His execution fundamentally fractured the nation's psyche. He was eulogized as a martyr in the North, but for the South, the raid convinced them that the North was conspiring to incite a race war against them. Meanwhile, after his defeat, Lincoln collected and published his debates with Douglas, turning himself into a national figure. The volumes circulated widely across the North, letting voters read Lincoln's arguments in his own words, especially his clear, logical case against the expansion of slavery. By the time the Republican Party was choosing its 1860 nominee, Lincoln was the obvious choice. The presidential election of 1860 occurred in an atmosphere of unprecedented volatility. The Democratic Party split into factions. Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas, while Southern Democrats, furious at him for rejecting a federal slave code, nominated John C. Breckinridge. Meanwhile, the newly formed Constitutional Union Party, in a desperate bid to ignore the slavery issue, nominated John Bell. This fracture in the opposition guaranteed a Republican victory. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States, sweeping the free states of the North despite the fact that his name was completely excluded from the ballot in 10 Southern states and that he won only 40% of the popular vote. For Southern radicals, Lincoln's election was the final, intolerable insult. They argued that remaining in the Union would lead to economic ruin and the destruction of the Southern way of life. Acting with lightning speed, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860, and over the next several weeks, 6 more states followed suit. Thanks for watching. If this journey down the road to the Civil War gave you a fresh perspective on the deep divides that tore the nation apart, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time.